Life has started on this planet since 14 billion years ago. People come in this world and leave. Among them, some people have made their name heard across the world. But does they always had a successful life? Do they always wanted to become what they were? What were their struggles? How did they live? Do they got a peaceful end? To know about all this, let's take a walk with us to the facts unforeseen.
(1889 to 1913). Early years background and childhood hardship. Charles Spencer Chaplin Jr. was born on April 16, 1889 to Hannah Chaplin, née Hill, and Charles Chaplin Sr. His paternal grandmother came from the Smith family, who belonged to Romani people. There is no official record of his birth, although Chaplin believed he was born at East Street, Walworth, in South London. His parents had married 4 years previously, at which time Charles Sr. became the legal guardian of Hannah's first son, Cindy John Hill. At the time of his birth, Chaplin's parents were both music hall entertainers. Hannah, the daughter of a shoemaker, had a brief and unsuccessful career under the stage name Lily Harley, while Charles Sr., a butcher's son, was a popular singer. Although they never divorced, Chaplin's parents were estranged by around 1891. The following year, Hannah gave birth to a third son, George Wheeler Dryden, fathered by the music hall entertainer Leo Dryden. The child was taken by Dryden at 6 months old, and did not re-enter Chaplin's life for 30 years. Chaplin's childhood was fraught with poverty and hardship, making his eventual trajectory the most dramatic of all the rags-to-riches stories ever told according to his authorized biographer David Robinson. Chaplin's early years were spent with his mother and brother Sidney in the London district of Kennington. Hannah had no means of income, other than occasional nursing and dressmaking, and Chaplin Sr. provided no financial support. As the situation deteriorated, Chaplin was sent to Lambeth Workhouse when he was 7 years old. The council housed him at the Central London District School for Paupers, which Chaplin remembered as a forlorn existence. He was briefly reunited with his mother 18 months later, but Hannah was forced to readmit her family to the workhouse in July 1898. The boys were promptly sent to Norwood Schools, another institution for destitute children. I was hardly aware of a crisis because we lived in a continual crisis, and, being a boy, I dismissed our troubles with gracious forgetfulness. Charlie Chaplin, on his childhood. In September 1898, Hannah was committed to Cane Hill Mental Asylum. She had developed a psychosis seemingly brought on by an infection of syphilis and malnutrition. For the 2 months she was there, Chaplin and his brother Sidney were sent to live with their father, whom the young boys scarcely knew. Charles Sr. was by then severely alcoholic, and life there was bad enough to provoke a visit from the National Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Children. Chaplin's father died 2 years later, at 38 years old, from cirrhosis of the liver. Hannah entered a period of remission but, in May 1903, became ill again. Chaplin, then 14, had the task of taking his mother to the infirmary, from where she was sent back to Cane Hill. He lived alone for several days, searching for food and occasionally sleeping rough, until Sidney, who had joined the Navy 2 years earlier, returned. Hannah was released from the asylum 8 months later, but in March 1905, her illness returned, this time permanently. There was nothing we could do but accept poor mother's fate, Chaplin later wrote, and she remained in care until her death in 1928. Young performer. Between his time in the poor schools and his mother succumbing to mental illness, Chaplin began to perform on stage. He later recalled making his first amateur appearance at the age of 5 years, when he took over from Hannah one night in Aldershot. This was an isolated occurrence, but by the time he was 9 Chaplin had, with his mother's encouragement, grown interested in performing. He later wrote, "Imbued me with the feeling that I had some sort of talent." Through his father's connections, Chaplin became a member of the 8 Lancashire Lads Clog dancing troupe, with whom he toured English music halls throughout 1899 and 1900. Chaplin worked hard, and the act was popular with audiences, but he was not satisfied with dancing and wished to form a comedy act. In the years Chaplin was touring with the 8 Lancashire Lads, his mother ensured that he still attended school, but, by the age of 13, he had abandoned education. He supported himself with a range of jobs, while nursing his ambition to become an actor. At 14, shortly after his mother's relapse, he registered with a theatrical agency in London's West End. The manager sensed potential in Chaplin, who was promptly given his first role as a newsboy in Harry Arthur Saintsbury's Jim, A Romance of Cockaigne. It opened in July 1903, but the show was unsuccessful and closed after 2 weeks. Chaplin's comic performance, however, was singled out for praise in many of the reviews. Saintsbury secured a role for Chaplin in Charles Frohman's production of Sherlock Holmes, where he played Billy the pageboy in 3 nationwide tours. His performance was so well received that he was called to London to play the role alongside William Gillette, the original Holmes. It was like tidings from heaven, Chaplin recalled. At 16 years old, Chaplin starred in the play's West End production at the Duke of York's Theatre from October to December 1905. He completed one final tour of Sherlock Holmes in early 1906, before leaving the play after more than 2.5 years. Stage comedy and vaudeville. Chaplin soon found work with a new company and went on tour with his brother, who was also pursuing an acting career, in a comedy sketch called Repairs. In May 1906, Chaplin joined the juvenile act Casey's Circus, where he developed popular burlesque pieces and was soon the star of the show. By the time the act finished touring in July 1907, the 18-year-old had become an accomplished comedic performer. He struggled to find more work, however, and a brief attempt at a solo act was a failure. Meanwhile, Cindy Chaplin had joined Fred Carnot's prestigious comedy company in 1906 and, by 1908, he was one of their key performers. In February, he managed to secure a 2-week trial for his younger brother. Carnot was initially wary, and considered Chaplin a pale, puny, sullen-looking youngster who looked much too shy to do any good in the theater. However, the teenager made an impact on his first night at the London Coliseum and he was quickly signed to a contract. Chaplin began by playing a series of minor parts, eventually progressing to starring roles in 1909. In April 1910, he was given the lead in a new sketch, Jimmy the Fearless. It was a big success, and Chaplin received considerable press attention. Carnot selected his new star to join the section of the company that toured North America's vaudeville circuit, a section which also included Stan Laurel. The young comedian headed the show and impressed reviewers, being described as one of the best pantomime artists ever seen here. His most successful role was a drunk called the Inebriate Swell, which drew him significant recognition. The tour lasted 21 months, and the troupe returned to England in June 1912. Chaplin recalled that he had a disquieting feeling of sinking back into a depressing commonplaceness and was, therefore, delighted when a new tour began in October 1914 to 1917, Enduring Films. Keystone. 6 months into the second American tour, Chaplin was invited to join the New York Motion Picture Company. A representative who had seen his performances thought he could replace Fred Mays, a star of their Keystone Studios who intended to leave. Chaplin thought the Keystone comedies a crude melange of rough and rumble, but liked the idea of working in films and rationalized, besides, it would mean a new life. He met with the company and signed a $150 per week contract in September 1913. Chaplin arrived in Los Angeles in early December, and began working for the Keystone Studio on January 5, 1914. Chaplin's boss was Max Sennett, who initially expressed concern that the 24-year-old looked too young. He was not used in a picture until late January, during which time Chaplin attempted to learn the processes of filmmaking. The one-reeler Making a Living marked his film acting debut and was released on February 2, 1914. Chaplin strongly disliked the picture, but one review picked him out as a comedian of the first water. For his second appearance in front of the camera, Chaplin selected the costume with which he became identified. He described the process in his autobiography. "I wanted everything to be a contradiction, the pants baggy, the coat tight, the hat small and the shoes large. I added a small mustache, which, I reasoned, would add age without hiding my expression. I had no idea of the character. But the moment I was dressed, the clothes and the makeup made me feel the person he was. I began to know him, and by the time I walked on stage he was fully born. The film was Mabel's Strange Predicament, but the tramp character, as it became known, debuted to audiences in kid auto races at Venice, shot later than Mabel's Strange Predicament but released 2 days earlier on February 7, 1914. Chaplin adopted the character as his screen persona and attempted to make suggestions for the films he appeared in. These ideas were dismissed by his directors. During the filming of his 11th picture, Mabel at the Wheel, he clashed with director Mabel Normand and was almost released from his contract. Senate kept him on. However, when he received orders from exhibitors for more Chaplin films, Senate also allowed Chaplin to direct his next film himself after Chaplin promised to pay $1,500, $44,000 in 2022 dollars, if the film was unsuccessful. Caught in the Rain, issued May 4, 1914, was Chaplin's directorial debut and was highly successful. Thereafter he directed almost every short film in which he appeared for Keystone, at the rate of approximately one per week, a period which he later remembered as the most exciting time of his career. Chaplin's films introduced a slower form of comedy than the typical Keystone farce, and he developed a large fan base. In November 1914, he had a supporting role in the first feature-length comedy film, Tilly's Punctured Romance, directed by Senate and starring Marie Dressler, which was a commercial success and increased his popularity. When Chaplin's contract came up for renewal at the end of the year, he asked for $1,000 a week, an amount Senate refused as he thought it was too large. S&A. The S&A Film Manufacturing Company of Chicago sent Chaplin an offer of $1,250 a week with a signing bonus of $10,000. He joined the studio in late December 1914, where he began forming a stock company of regular players, actors he worked with again and again, including Ben Turpin, Leo White, Bud Jameson, Patty Maguire, Fred Goodwins, and Billy Armstrong. He soon recruited a leading lady, Edna Purviance, whom Chaplin met in a cafe and hired on account of her beauty. She went on to appear in 35 films with Chaplin over 8 years. The pair also formed a romantic relationship that lasted until 1917. Chaplin asserted a high level of control over his pictures and started to put more time and care into each film. There was a month-long interval between the release of his second production, A Night Out, and his third, The Champion. The final 7 of Chaplin's 14 S&A films were all produced at this slower pace. Chaplin also began to alter his screen persona, which had attracted some criticism at Keystone for its mean, crude, and brutish nature. The character became more gentle and romantic. The Tramp, April 1915, was considered a particular turning point in his development. The use of pathos was developed further with The Bank, in which Chaplin created a sad ending. Robinson notes that this was an innovation in comedy films, and marked the time when serious critics began to appreciate Chaplin's work. At S&A, writes film scholar Simon Lubitsch, Chaplin found the themes and the settings that would define the Tramp's world. During 1915, Chaplin became a cultural phenomenon. Shops were stocked with Chaplin merchandise, he was featured in cartoons and comic strips, and several songs were written about him. In July, a journalist for Motion Picture magazine wrote that Chaplinitis had spread across America. As his fame grew worldwide, he became the film industry's first international star. When the S&A contract ended in December 1915, Chaplin, fully aware of his popularity, requested a $150,000 signing bonus from his next studio. He received several offers, including Universal, Fox, and Videograph, the best of which came from the Mutual Film Corporation at $10,000 a week. Mutual. A contract was negotiated with Mutual that amounted to $670,000 a year, which Robinson says made Chaplin, at 26 years old, one of the highest paid people in the world. The high salary shocked the public and was widely reported in the press. John R. Frailer, The studio president explained, "We can't afford to pay Mr. Chaplin this large sum annually because the public wants Chaplin and will pay for him." Mutual gave Chaplin his own Los Angeles studio to work in, which opened in March 1916. He added 2 key members to his stock company, Albert Austin and Eric Campbell, and produced a series of elaborate 2-reelers, The Floorwalker, The Fireman, The Vagabond, 1 a.m., and The Count. For The Pawnshop, he recruited the actor Henry Bergman, who was to work with Chaplin for 30 years. Behind the Screen and The Rink completed Chaplin's releases for 1916. The mutual contract stipulated that he release a 2-reel film every 4 weeks, which he had managed to achieve. With the new year, however, Chaplin began to demand more time. He made only 4 more films for Mutual over the first 10 months of 1917, Easy Street, The Cure, The Immigrant, and The Adventurer. With their careful construction, these films are considered by Chaplin scholars to be among his finest work. Later in life, Chaplin referred to his Mutual years as the happiest period of his career. However, Chaplin also felt that those films became increasingly formulaic over the period of the contract, and he was increasingly dissatisfied with the working conditions encouraging that. Chaplin was attacked in the British media for not fighting in the First World War. He defended himself, claiming that he would fight for Britain if called and had registered for the American draft, but he was not summoned by either country. Despite this criticism, Chaplin was a favorite with the troops, and his popularity continued to grow worldwide. Harper's Weekly reported that the name of Charlie Chaplin was a part of the common language of almost every country, and that the tramp image was universally familiar. In 1917, professional Chaplin imitators were so widespread that he took legal action, and it was reported that 9 out of 10 men who attended costume parties did so dressed as the tramp. The same year, a study by the Boston Society for Psychical Research concluded that Chaplin was an American obsession. The actress Minnie Maddern-Fisk wrote that a constantly increasing body of cultured, artistic people are beginning to regard the young English buffoon, Charles Chaplin, as an extraordinary artist, as well as a comic genius.
So this was the first episode of The Fact Unforeseen. If you like the video, please do like, share and subscribe. It takes a lot of effort to make these videos. In the second episode, we will discuss further years, films, popularity of Charlie Chaplin, challenges in life, affairs, marriages, children's, cause of death, death body conspiracy, and the burial conspiracy. So do not miss the next episode of The Facts Unforeseen.